Thank you very much, and a warm welcome to you to another exciting panel discussion that we have here, which is, as I mentioned in the morning, a joint event between the Global Solutions Summit and the Berlin Global Dialogue, which also actually will be held vice versa in the fall. It is a great pleasure to discuss a topic which is of utmost importance. It is of utmost importance despite the fact that the academic publications on this topic are just about 5 to 10% of the publications we've seen on climate change and how to deal with climate change. At the same time, as we could see Johan Rockström this morning, he made it very clear that in terms of our planetary boundaries, the question of biodiversity is of the same importance as climate change. Now, we do see the change when we, for example, think of the COP in Montreal, all the different initiatives that have started with this. But there's at the same time still a lot to be done. And this is why I'm very delighted, very thankful for a great distinguished panel to come here today to discuss exactly the topics where we stand, where the hurdles are, where the opportunities are, and precisely what we should need to do in order to take it to the next level. And let me do the introduction in alphabetical order. First, to my right, we have Anna Alex, the founder of Nala Earths. Great to have you with us, and a warm welcome to you. We have, to my left, Eva Kracht, the Director General for International and European Policy at the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection. A warm welcome to you as well. Then we have Deborah Roberts, and I would say with the longest distance to come here, so therefore a particularly warm welcome to you as a co-chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And last but not least, Christoph Schenk, the director of the Frankfurt Zoological Society, and I should admit, someone from whom I personally learned a lot about the question of biodiversity and got a lot of inspiration, if one may say so, even if it's a difficult topic to look at. So therefore, maybe let's start by just looking at the stage, setting the stage at which we are, where maybe the opportunities are, where the hurdles are, but maybe just to start with an initial setting for what also needs to be discussed. Would you like to start?
Okay, I do. So setting the stage for biodiversity. Yeah, maybe, I mean, you already compared it to climate. I think this is an interesting comparison. I think there are a lot of parallels. It is at the same importance, yet the public and as well the economy and the businesses do not pay the attention yet to the topic that it deserves. And at the same time, we see this changing very rapidly right now as we speak. So what do we have now? We have kind of this level playing field created just recently through international targets and goals that we set ourselves, and as well to frameworks how to measure biodiversity and nature. And that's why I'm super excited to be in this space right now, right here. I think it's a point in time where really we as humanity, as a business world, are slowly changing our whole view on nature, on biodiversity, and will need to incorporate it into our business thinking, into our daily thinking, and into everything we do. I mean, I'm very positive about this.
So maybe talking about the incorporation into, what would be your view? How far has it been incorporated? What else would need to be incorporated?
I think there remains a lot to be done, and I'm really glad that you're so optimistic about especially business picking up the issue, because it's so important that especially business also gets involved. Well, we've seen quite a lot of progress. We've seen the Global Biodiversity Framework. We've seen BBNJ, the treaty that protects the high seas, adopted. We have, and I think that is very important, we have all the environmental issues, including biodiversity, named among the main risks by the Global Risks Report in Davos, by the World Economic Forum. Also, NATO, in a recent Foresight report, named climate change and biodiversity loss as the most likely existential challenges in the long time. So there is growing awareness, but at the same time, it's not easy. I agree that there is not the same kind of attention as for climate change everywhere, in politics, in businesses, and in society. There is also there are conflicts. I mean, you see the farmers' protests that have been strongly linked to biodiversity issues. I'm not going to go into whether I think that's right or wrong. We'll talk about that later, I think. I mean, this is about scarce resources. This is about the use of space. So we do need to find a way to discuss these things, to negotiate them, to go forward and find solutions that work for everybody.
Perfect. I would say the discussion we can have here, the negotiation might be a little bit more difficult, but this is at least what this Global Solutions Summit should be about, to discuss it in a way that it actually can become part of the negotiation. Deborah, your view on this. Where do we stand? Where do you see the opportunities and the hurdles?
So let me correct my affiliation up front. I was co-chair of the IPCC in the 6th assessment cycle, which is the one that's just been completed. I think the problem with biodiversity, the major challenge that I see is we're treating it in a very 20th century way. We're still of the mindset that we're preserving whales and look at the Amazon forest. I think Johan pointed to the 21st century challenge that will beset biodiversity. Johan is talking about a best case scenario of overshoot for 30 to 40 years. And what we showed in the last assessment cycle is there will be irreversible loss during that period of overshoot. So even if you return to a temperature of 1.5, there'll be irreversible losses in the natural systems. And I don't think we're talking about that. Some things are going to lose, some ecosystems will lose. And that's a new playing field for biodiversity. We're not going to be able to pull back from the edge anymore. And given the strong reliance we've got on nature-based solutions in the climate narrative, this really poses a challenge, not only for biodiversity, but its links with the climate change challenge. So I think we've got to reframe the biodiversity debate, because I think without dealing with biodiversity, we're going to experience a very severe problem in dealing with climate change.
Thank you. And first of all, my apologies for the wrong affiliation. But talking about the consequences of overshooting, and Christoph, you have obviously explored, investigated, researched this, not only, say, in very general terms, but also when you were at the places at which biodiversity is affected and is endangered most severely. How do you see this question of hurdles, opportunities, in particular when you look at the consequences that we can already observe right now?
Yeah, I know that panelists are hated when they don't go directly to answering the question, but let me do one remark. And I really want to thank everyone in that room joining that session on biodiversity now. And I give you the task to scan through the program how often you will see the word biodiversity in that program now, which is a Global Solutions Summit, and you don't find it often now. But biodiversity is the base of all now. So all what is discussed over these 2 days now, from geopolitical separation, fragmentation, to digitalization, to automotive, to energy transformation, all you can forget about when we don't save biodiversity loss now. And that was what the European community already said about 4 years ago, when they said 80% of the SDGs we will not achieve if we don't hold the loss of biodiversity now. We are nowhere there now holding the loss of biodiversity. All the data we get globally, and also when we are traveling or working in the 18 countries where we are active as the Frankfurt Zoological Society, we see all negative trends. Only negative trends. Now we have 1 million species endangered. Now we lose about 100 to 150 species per day, extinct by our activities on planet Earth. Now, when you go home tonight, now we will have lost another 100, 150 species. Many of them we don't know, because we know only 2 million species. Might be there are 8 million or 10 million species on Earth now. So we lost entire population. 70% of the larger population on planet Earth got already diminished or extinct now. So we see we are entering a stage of mass extinction on planet Earth now. But that's the base of our survival. We need these species, we need the ecosystems, we need the functioning. Now, 3/4 of our food production depends on pollination by animals now, by insects now. So what we see is we see a parallel world now. So we see the data of the science and what is really happening in the world. We hear Johan Rockström and others, and then we see what is governments doing, what is corporates doing, and what are consumers doing. And that is completely separated. And to your question, we see we are on a crossroad now. Now, either we can go down the road, or we can, what Johan said, bending the curve. We can go into a better world, more justice, more ecologically friendly, more sustainable. We still have that opportunity, but we will not have that in 20 years' time. We definitely will not have it. When I entered this building this morning, there was a sign saying, "See you tomorrow." And I was thinking, 50 years ahead, whom of you I will be able to see tomorrow? I imagine if the trends continue, most of you I will not see tomorrow in 30 or 50 years' time, because most of the big cities will be gone by then. Now, we will go into a world where we see catastrophes now, and we will not have a tomorrow if we continue as we do. But I'm with you, we need the optimism. I'm optimist by profession now, and we can't go in desperation. But we have it in our hands now. It's not something coming from space. No, it's about us now. So yeah, I think we are in a very critical part, might be the most critical part of mankind on planet Earth now. We call ourselves Homo sapiens. I think might be we should call ourselves Homo mutus, the stupid man. No, we still have the option to change to Homo sapiens, but we have to do it now.
Thank you. So, in fact, you did answer my question, and let me also say what you said in the beginning of why I also think this is such an important topic coincides exactly with what you just said, and this was also when we said in our strong cooperation between the Global Solutions Summit, the Berlin Global Dialogue, that this should really be a topic that really bridges exactly the different stakeholders that should be involved. And you mentioned some of them already. You just mentioned consumers, investors, you may say employees, other members of, say, societal groups. When you think of who is in the lead? Who should be in the lead? Maybe to start with, you mentioned, given that you mentioned them, and now let me take one answer I will not allow, which is all of them. But maybe, who should be the starting point? Where should be the set?
If I have to make choices, no, as you said, no, so I would go to my right. Now I think governments are really key now. Governments have to give the framework, have to give the regulations, then corporates will buy into. Now corporates buy into what the framework is. They can deal with that. That's the world of the corporates. Now, at the end comes the consumer, so we have to communicate it the right way. Otherwise, the governments will be elected out now, and then there will be no choice now. So therefore, but we have to start somewhere now, and we have to do it fast. And we are well placed here, and this is why I also appreciate it so much now to have that round here and to have the activities of your institution here, because we are in the third biggest economy in the world now. So we are a lead organization on all that. And Germany has to come back into a leading force. Now, we lost that now, even in terms of financial resources. We lost that. We are going to lose it, might be even more over the next few months. That's a big mistake. But we can still be in the lead now. So I would say governments, but also on the positive side, look at countries like Brazil. Brazil has decreased forest loss significantly. It's not there where it should be, but it has reduced a lot. We have other countries. I'm just coming back from Tanzania. Tanzania has set aside more than 30% of the land protected, differently protected as in Germany, lots of national parks, large areas. So that is leading, and one positive news as well is we see more engagement by local communities and indigenous populations in protecting their own environment they depend on now. And they link forces together with the NGOs now, and then forcing the governments as well to buy into that now. So this is also positive now. So I would say these are the main drivers for a better future.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, please
if
go ahead.
I can add to this, I would agree with this order, and I think what is interesting, we are in a situation, again, compared to climate, where the consumers don't have any clue about biodiversity. So if you just ask a random person on the street, what is biodiversity? Probably 80% would say it's a skin cream or something, yeah? So it's really, so we are all sitting on the basis like of the biodiversity, right? So everything we do is based on this, and the public awareness is not yet there. And this was different with climate. So Fridays for Future were in the streets. It was like all the newspapers were full of climate things and so on. And I think there is a way that we make it without completely educating the public on the importance, because the big levers are with the corporates and so with the politics. But still, of course, this is a big task for every one of us to really educate yourself a little bit on biodiversity, talk with your friends about it, make it a dinner topic, share some facts on this.
Yeah, and I hope also with our our audience here, with the audience online, we can also contribute a little bit to this. Before coming back to this part, now talking about governments, what is it that, first of all, do you expect, or let's say, do you accept the expectation that Christoph just shared with governments taking or having the first priority here, or what are your views on this?
Well, I'm afraid I agree. Take on the responsibility that we do have. It's not science that bears the main responsibility. We do have, there's still much to be discovered, but we do have a very solid scientific basis that tells us very clearly it's high time to act. Businesses certainly have a very important role. Businesses, also financial actors. Because, of course, businesses, we cannot do it without businesses. Like, for example, we talk a lot about money, the money it will take to protect biodiversity, to change the trend. Public money is important in this game, but there is so much more private money in the world, and it will be of an essential question of whether we manage to channel the private money into the right direction. But again, we're back to governments in a way. This is also about businesses, about understanding their dependency on nature. Again, it's the World Economic Forum that says more than 50% of the global economy are moderately or highly dependent on nature, and others have higher numbers than that. It's the basis of our life, of our livelihoods, of our economies. We cannot do without that, and businesses are increasingly also looking into this and understanding the risks that come from a decrease in the state of nature. But governments, of course, are there to act, to set legal frameworks, to make political decisions, and also to have a very deep, very continuous international exchange, because like Christoph made it very clear, this is also not only about Germany, but very much about international cooperation. And for example, together with Colombia, Germany set off the NBCEP Accelerator Partnership, which is a partnership there to help implement on the ground the Global Biodiversity Framework. And I also agree that local communities are a very important player, including indigenous peoples. It's important to use their knowledge, their traditional ways of doing things, and they must agree with what is being done. In the end, they must be the stewards of, in many cases, of the land.
So maybe if I ask a little bit more about priorities. I asked Christoph about the priorities, let's say, across different sectors. Now, listening to you, there are lots of different ways in which governments can influence all this. If you had to actually pick now your priority just within the governmental sector, what would it be?
Well, in Germany, I'm afraid I cannot do. In Germany, one important thing will now be, in Germany, like in each and every country, revising our so-called NBCEPs, that's the National Biodiversity Strategies and Action Plans, which are there to transport the content of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is good, into national politics. That it will be a decisive step to actually bring about change on the ground. And then if I maybe pick a second one, it'll be a cooperation with business, with the financial industry, to make sure that the things that actually pay off usually for society as a whole are being incorporated into business plans.
Very good. So this means we have identified governments, we have identified corporates, we have identified the interaction between them. Deborah, your thoughts in terms of priorities, whom to actually take with us on this journey?
Well, I perhaps would want to deepen some of the answers. So I think we use the term governance or governments as one size fits all, but there's multi-level governance. And I think we often forget about local government because they're where the rubber hits the road. So the policies and laws that national governments devise are implemented at the local government level. So I think local governments are really critical, but they're also at a source of friction between society and business. I've spent 30 years in local government watching businesses come into my offices and say, we're really interested in biodiversity, but. There's always a but in that, and there's a strong pressure from business, particularly at the local level, on local government structures. And you must remember the political mind is only interested in a timescale between 3 to 5 years, an election cycle. So if you've got a big business at a local government level putting pressure on local governments, very often you can have laws and policies that simply aren't implemented because of the pressures of business. So I think we need to see real leadership in business, turning the narrative around biodiversity into something that's much more constructive. I don't believe that government can do it all because of the levers that business has on governments. I mean, we see that in Africa with major land grabs on our continent by corporates with vested interests who have no interest in biodiversity. But I think we've also got to look at the other side of the problem. So there's been mention of indigenous communities and local communities. We've got to remember, and I think Johan said it well today, I mean, basically we've exceeded the ecological capacity of the globe, very often coming in with biodiversity initiatives. I mean, you can have green gentrification in the context of urban areas. You can get people moved off land who are informal to make way for biodiversity initiatives. And so, in fact, you can increase inequity and vulnerability through biodiversity if we don't take on board a just and equitable look. So this is a problem, and I find there are very many forums who don't want to concede that we've moved out of the win-win scenarios, I think, that were sold at the first Earth Summit and that we all got terribly excited about. I mean, who doesn't buy a storyline of you can have your cake and eat it? We're now moving, particularly in continents like Africa, into win-lose scenarios. And the question is who's going to lose and what's going to lose. And I think that's an important narrative that we've got to draw into the biodiversity debate. There's some really tough choices ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Which leads us actually right away to Anna. So Deborah mentioned the question of the role of business, also maybe the vested interests, which obviously are very important to consider. So how to overcome these vested interests. How do you view the corporate contribution or the potential of corporate contribution to solve these, this significant challenge?
Yeah, so I do believe the big lever is with the businesses, to put it very, very clearly. And talking to a lot of businesses every week about this topic, we really see a very wide range of awareness and as well a very wide range of willingness to act. So there are, and it's probably like with every new thing, it's with like, we see this innovation curve, right? We see some early adopters and we see some late adopters, and then at some point it's a big majority. And I think it's a little bit with digitalization. So you can try to close your eyes in front of it for as long as possible, but then you have a real you cannot gain from the benefits. And there were companies who did it early and who were the early adopters, and they benefited from it. So we see companies saying, I know, so let me take one example. A company from the food and beverage space begging on one crop, so not a diverse set of different foods, but really one crop, saying we know it is important for us, but we don't want to see it because ultimately the board is afraid that we cannot use pesticides anymore down the road. So no, we don't want to do an analysis on this. So this as a negative example. I was on this call and was like, oh my gosh, okay. And then we see as well very positive examples of companies who don't even yet need to report on it, but they say, we understood it is a strategic lever for us. We want to base our strategic decisions on that. For example, there's a big supermarket chain currently buying all their coffee suppliers because they understood it will be a scarce resource going forward. They want to strategically own this resource, right? Or they said, we understood there is a high risk for us involved. So the CFOs are listening. So one of the, I think, like very concrete cases is the Tesla case in the Gigafactory in Brandenburg, where they put a production which needs a lot of water into an area with high water stress, and then they were limited on water because there was just no water left, and they lost 6 billion through the delays that they faced in the production. And this is a very concrete case, and when you say like the CFOs of this world are listening and saying, 6 billion we lost. Okay, so this is interesting, let's talk about it. And I think this is really one of the biggest and best bags that we have on biodiversity is this risk factor. The direct and local risks that companies are exposed to, which is slightly different in climate. In climate, I'm putting like CO2 into the atmosphere, then there's a drought in India, I don't have any supply chains in India, I don't care. I'm exaggerating, yeah? But for biodiversity, I'm using a lot of water, there is no water left, I'm in a water-stressed region, so I do care because it's my really like local risk. And I think this risk is really our entry ticket to the boardrooms with the topic of nature and biodiversity.
And when you look at this, so you just mentioned, say, the early adopters, you have the imitators. When you look at, say, the development over the last, say, 2 years maybe, how much of a change have you seen there across the board? You mentioned this broad variety still of perceptions, but say if you took the average of those and look at it, say, across the last 2 years.
Yeah, so I would say it's going into the right direction of more and more awareness and more companies putting this on their agenda. Still, it's going too slow. What's helped tremendously are things like TNFD and the early adopter program of TNFD, where over 300 companies now committed to do the analysis, check all their production and supply chains on the topic of biodiversity, and really are using the frameworks of TNFD. Because now you can say, well, see, but Tesco can do it as well, right? So yeah, I know it's hard to understand where the crops are coming from that are ending up in this mill, but they can do it as well. Here's the case study. So let's do it. Let's overcome this. It's not measurable. We don't know where our supply is actually coming from, and so on. So let's not accept these arguments from the businesses anymore, but really like slowly like looking at this and really saying, no, this is not valid anymore. We can't track it all. It's never perfect. The data is never perfect because it's our nature. It's the most beautiful and complex thing that we have on Earth. But the data is clearly there to know where we're harming nature and what we need to do in order to stop that.
Okay. So now there has been a lot of discussion, also I know among members in this panel, about the EU Nature Restoration Law. And the question is, where do we stand, and to what extent could it be a role model also for other parts of the world?
Well, hopefully it can at least be a trigger for similar activities in other parts of the world. The Nature Restoration Law, the EU Nature Restoration Law, picks up what was, among other things, decided in Montreal in the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is it's not enough to protect nature from further deterioration. We're at a point where we need to talk about restoring nature to a more resilient, to more stable, to more living status, basically. So I'm absolutely convinced that this is the right thing to do for Europe. But as you may have seen, it's been very contentious all along. There were difficult negotiations, and in the end, it's a weaker text than the original proposal, but still a useful instrument that would kick off a process. And things are actually already being debated already action is starting. So it is having an effect, even though it is not enforced, because now the European Parliament accepted formally the compromise and Council has not yet. We're still kind of discussing amongst member states to find the necessary majority. Well, like I say, hopefully it will be formally adopted and it will be implemented, because it can be not necessarily a role model, but a trigger to similar action in other parts of the world. It can show that it can be done and that it's important even in an industrial area like Germany. And maybe one last word, because this was very much also linked to the farmers' protests. That made the debate of this law so difficult, or that added to the difficulties very much. And of course, farmers are amongst the businesses that really depend on nature. It's very interesting to hear your example of the pesticides use, because indeed we might come to the conclusion, I'm pretty sure we will eventually come to the conclusion, that agriculture needs to be thought, conceived, and done in a different way in the future. But it's a difficult debate right now.
Christoph, now given that you obviously deal with biodiversity on a global scale, to what extent do you think that what is happening in the European Union already has an impact also on other parts of the world? Or put it differently, how could we also have an impact on other parts of the world, which doesn't come across as basically imposing things, but rather that deal with a self-interest also and say action that is intrinsically motivated by other parts of the world, which I could say might be even much more important for protecting biodiversity on a global scale than maybe Germany or other parts?
Absolutely. And also we find 80% of the biodiversity on 20% on the land. And most of the biodiversity is, of course, in the tropical zone. Nevertheless, all what the European community does now reflects on the world. Now, so we have one of the highest ecological footprints. So if we reduce our footprint, that has, of course, a tremendous global impact. And we have a bill to pay as well now for our wealth. Now, so we should finance biodiversity protection beyond Europe. But also we have to do our homework. And the world is looking on us. China is looking what the European community does now. And with this law on restoration, I think there are very positive but also very negative elements in now. So the positive one is that this law is already on the table now. It might be the most important conservation laws over the last 30 years in Europe now. It's a fundamental law with a commitment. There are goals, there are indicators, so you can't shy away now in the future. It's much more concrete than anything else we have seen in the past now. It has been watered down, yes, now, but it's still a good framework now. So it says that 20% of the land in Europe must be restored. Now, to give you the other side is 80% of the habitats in Europe are not in a good stage. Now, on the negative part, we see really a perverse, I call it really a perverse development. Now, so you have a house, and the house is falling apart, and you have a fire in the kitchen, and you say, here's some money, here's some water, now to turn off the fire, and here's some construction so that the house is not falling apart. And the people say, no, we don't want that. How could that be? Now, how could that be? Agriculture is the main driver for biodiversity loss and the main ones depending on biodiversity. Now, how could you be so stupid now to act against your own future? Now, that is really hard for me to understand. Now, so therefore, we can't understand that this law is not implemented now and that it is held back by the council currently. Now, so we need the power of the citizens and of the governments now to get that law through. Now, and so we have to reverse the rollback we currently see in the entire European community, including us, Germany, now on the supply chain, on the pesticides law, now on the conflict minerals, and all what we have seen now. So therefore, I believe, yes, the European community has a very important role to play. Now, it was on a good track with the European Green Deal. It has lost that track. and it has to come back on that track. Absolutely necessary for our whole future.
So picking up on this, Deborah, now the conference theme is, the title of the conference is Global Solutions. So it has both components. Obviously, we're looking into solutions, and second, they should be of global nature. Looking into what you've just heard about, say, the European initiative, but maybe taking it on a more global scheme. What is it that you would envision, that you would maybe also see as developments that make you cheerful in finding these solutions?
Well, I think, perhaps just listening to this debate around what is happening in Europe, it's perhaps a real signal to the Global South that we shouldn't repeat your mistakes. We must never be in a position where we've got to pass this law. We still have large, intact ecosystems. So, in fact, we've done far better than you have. And in fact, the lessons should be flowing the other way, because we are currently the custodians of the world's biodiversity. And I think that's often a problem, is that the lessons from the Global South are not flowing to the Global North. And I think we must acknowledge it has to be a two-way learning. So for me, the encouraging point is the Global South is still in a position where it doesn't yet need these kinds of laws. But I think what this debate does indicate is that it opens up a broader platform. And just listening to the discussion we've had around business, the assumption we make about business is we're talking about the big corporates. But if you come to Africa, we've got a huge informal economy that falls between the cracks of any of these discussions. And I think we need to look at that, because our economies will depend on that informality for a long period of time. These are not large corporates who do not have the resources, but still have an impact on the environment. So I think the real opportunity is to use fora like the Global Solutions Fora to really shine a light into the dark corners of the places we don't go with our usual conversations. So fine, let's work with the big corporates, but let's think about the informal economies that are the backbone of the Global South in many ways. Let's think about the fact that the Global South, in fact, is the custodian of the world's biodiversity, and that draws us into discussions around debt relief to enable us to have economies that allow us to protect our biodiversity. But I think we must also be realistic. In our city, we started some of the largest urban restoration programs in South African cities. And I don't think we fully interrogated the cost of restoration. It sounds like a really cool idea. The costs over the long term and the social costs are actually enormous. So we're not having these very practical and real-time conversations. So my courage comes from the fact that we're hosting these conversations where we can have these honest inputs, shine a light into the darker corners, move away from the traditional discussions around business and biodiversity, and crack open some of these sort of 21st century challenges that we haven't dealt with before.
Thank you very much for this. And I think this actually, if I could choose a topic for next year, this is, or for the next Global Solutions Summit, I think this is actually a very important point, this informal, or the importance of informal economies, and really to really tackle it from a purely and truly global perspective. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Anna, any thoughts from your side on maybe, again, from the global and the solutions part? How does it come together? What should we take away that could be done until, say, we meet again next year, that we should take into account, that helps us to tackle these challenges?
Okay, so I think what you should take away is the technology there, the data is there to know where we're harming nature. The willingness is there to a certain extent, needs to be accelerated a lot. And what I'm still missing when I'm thinking about this complex thing of like many parts coming together, what I'm still missing, and maybe we find someone in the room or someone on the panel stepping up to this, it's really this global narrative that we need in order to look beyond the next election period, for example, beyond the next few years, that we want to like head towards like happy people living in harmony with nature and with each other on this world. Something more concrete, right? We need to really visualize this, and then I believe we can do it. But I'm missing a global narrative. This is what I would like to see.
Great mandate for what actually could be done over the next year. maybe to conclude, almost unfortunately, I have to say, unfortunately, I'm running out of time because there's so many topics we could delve into much more deeply. Eva, what would be your hope for, say, being at the same place here 1 year from now? What should have been achieved? What is the concrete suggestion, the solution that we should go for?
If I may, like Christoph, not start by answering your question, but I would like to react to Deborah, because I really like this notion of the North should learn from the South in this. And it's interesting because basically what you're saying is the South is rich in nature and has avoided mistakes that we have done. At the same time, we have this fairness debate. You hinted upon it, mentioning the debt relief, because arguments that come from the South go like, well, you exploited nature and you developed well, you're rich societies, and we have to get the same opportunity. And that, I think, is a very important dialogue between the North and the South. On the one hand, working together to preserve these, this very rich nature that is really important to mankind as a whole, but also accepting and respecting the needs of the South and making sure that that the South doesn't follow us in making the same mistakes, but also that we provide opportunities for development. And I'm not going to go into details now. Well, so maybe that is also something that could have improved by next year, the dialogue and the understanding between the global North and the global South. We're starting to have a good dialogue sometimes within the G20 on actually not only accusing each other of not understanding, of being, for example, the EU deforestation law has triggered a lot of criticism from the South, although I do think that it's a way of taking responsibility in the North, so there are different aspects to it, but we're starting to have a good dialogue, especially with Brazil at this point in time, where we can really talk about each other's needs and interests, and not only about certain instruments that may be contentious.
Very good. Now we have our own overshoot, which is overshooting of time resources. But that, I think, before we will be kicked down here, let me thank you very much for your great insights. I think this is exactly what I can just hope for Global Solutions, to exactly have this view on what are the different perspectives from different parts of the world, what is in there, what needs to be done. And I would say, based on what we had just discussed, there seems to be some tangible ways to go forward and tackle the problem. So again, thank you very much for our distinguished panelists. Thanks a lot for your great insights. And with this, I would like to conclude the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.